بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
The talk today, the topic of the talk that the Shaykh spoke about was concerning the hearts of the believers, and different affairs regarding the heart of the believer, and how how the person should look after his heart, and how he should bring up his heart and culture his heart and nurture his heart. The Shaykh began firstly by saying that we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He's made this meeting easy for us, that we can sit here today and we can discuss these affairs. And he says that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us successful and He makes us upright and straight. And then the Shaykh said that he wishes tonight to speak a small word or a small reminder on an affair which is very important, that we all need, and we all need to go back to this affair often, specifically in these times of fitan, these times of trials and tribulations, that we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from, these trials and tribulations that are present in our time. And he says as a consequence of that, this particular topic, we need it even more in these types of fitan, these types of trials. And he says that's the topic of the heart. And he says the heart in the Arabic language, which is called qalb, he says the reason why qalb is called qalb, as some of them they explain, because qalb in the Arabic language means something which changes around. It moves from one thing to another. It moves from one position to another position. It turns around, it moves around. And he says that's why the qalb in Arabic is called qalb. The heart is called the heart, because the heart is always changing. At one time you might feel one thing, at one time you might feel strong, one time you might feel weak. So the heart is always changing from different positions to other positions. And that's why in the Arabic language they say that the heart is called qalb, because qalb means to turn around from one to another. So he says at certain times the heart might be weak, and at other times the heart might be strong. And at the times when the heart is weak, it's when the heart is not filled with the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the piety from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's not filled with iman. And this is the time when the heart will be weak, and especially in the times of trials and tribulations. If the heart is not filled with this taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this fearfulness and piety of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and iman, then the heart will become weak, especially in those times of fitan. And on top of that, the fitan, these trials and tribulations, if you were to add to this the desires of the soul, then the heart becomes even more weakened. So the heart becomes weak anyway in the times of trials and tribulations and fitan. But then if you add to that desires of the person, the desires of the soul, in the times of fitan, then the heart becomes even weaker when you put the two together. And then the Shaykh says the heart, this great organ of the body, it is like the king or the ruler or the leader, the one that controls the rest of the organs of the body, or the organ that controls the rest of the parts of the body. It is the leader of the rest of the parts of the body, the heart. It is the core, the center. And at times it becomes weak, and therefore we always need to return back to our hearts. We always need to keep a link with our hearts to make sure that they don't become weak. And the way we do that, the Shaykh says, is that we need always to return back to knowledge, to always be filling our hearts with knowledge and studying and learning, and in order that will then increase your iman. And if a person then does this, then he continuously returns to knowledge, and he's always sticking to knowledge, then his iman increases and his heart will continue upon the pathway of being strong, will continue upon being strong, and will continue upon directing the rest of his body parts in a good way, because the heart is the leader of the rest of the body parts. So a person needs to keep his connection with knowledge all the time, and keep his connection with studying, in order that his iman is increased, and so that his heart is kept in a state of strengthness, so that it can guide the rest of the organs of the body in that manner also. Then the opposite of that, the Shaykh says, is that if you have a heart which is hardened, a person who has a heart which is a hardened heart, then this is the opposite of the one who was busy with knowledge. So the one who is not busy with knowledge, and the one whose iman is weak and his taqwa is weak, then he is in a state where his heart becomes hardened. And the Shaykh says that this has certain reasons to it, why a person's heart may become hardened. He doesn't feel the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doesn't feel the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has this hardening of his heart. And some of the reasons why the Shaykh says this occurs, he says the main one of these reasons is that a person, he distances himself from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person distances himself from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if a person does that, he distances himself from the supplications and from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then his heart becomes hardened. And he says, the person whose heart has become hardened, then he has indeed been hit with a great punishment. The one whose heart has become hardened, then he has been hit with a great punishment. And he says that there's no person who's been hit with a greater punishment, or that a greater punishment has befallen him, except for the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes his heart to become hardened. So the one whose heart is caused to become hardened, then it's as if he is the one who has gained the greatest punishment that you can get, i.e. his heart has become hardened. And he says that the hardened heart is the most distant of the hearts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A hardened heart is the heart which is the most distant of the hearts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he mentioned some ayat from the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated this meaning also about the hearts becoming hard. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that woe be upon the hardened hearts from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Woe be upon the hardened hearts from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he mentioned the statement of Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Ibn al-Qayyim, he said that the furthest of the hearts, or the most distant of the hearts from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the heart which has become hardened. And at the same time, his heart has become hardened and his eye has become dry. His heart has become hardened and his eye has become dry. And then the Shaykh said, because it's known, the eye, it follows the heart. As it was said previously, the heart, it controls the rest of the organs. So the Shaykh says the eye, it follows the heart. So if the heart becomes hardened, then the eye becomes dry. And he says this is known, that the eye is connected to the heart from the hadith, the famous hadith of Irbad ibn Sariyah. The hadith, which the Shaykh says is a Hasan hadith, is an authentic hadith, where Irbad ibn Sariyah, he said in that hadith, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَعَذَنَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وسلم, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he gave them a reminder, an admonition. He gave them an admonition, and he said, وَجِلَتِ الْقُلُوبِ وَضَرَفَتِ الْعُيُونِ, that the hearts, they became softened, and the eyes, they began to weep. The hearts became softened, and the eyes began to weep as a consequence of this reminder or this admonition that the Prophet ﷺ gave to them. And the Shaykh used that as evidence to indicate to you that the eye is linked to the heart. So if the heart becomes softened, then the eye becomes softened and it cries, as in the narration of this narration of Irbad ibn Sariyah.